Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thanks so much for tuning in to the Common Good podcast. So excited that you're joining with us today. My name is Royce, one of the pastors here at Common Good Church. And, one of my favorite parts about being a pastor is I literally get a front row seat into seeing and hearing stories of people in our church and people connected to our church who are living out their faith and making a difference in their communities. I love listening and learning from well-known, respected, renowned pastors and authors and thought leaders and experts in various fields and industries. But I think there's something special. There's something inspiring. There's something encouraging about hearing stories and the journey of just regular, everyday, ordinary people who are living into their convictions and who are finding ways to work for the common good of their communities. One of the things that we really do believe at Common Good Church is that Jesus was for the common good. He is for the common good. He is for the flourishing of all people and all persons. And so as people of faith, as Jesus followers, we believe that that's our call, that we too would also be people who are partnering with Jesus and working for the common good. And so that's really what this podcast is all about. We get to highlight stories of everyday, regular, ordinary people of faith who are finding ways to use their passions, their skills, their talents, their gifts, their resources, their influence for the common good. And the hope is that you'll be inspired, you'll be encouraged, you'll be challenged to discover your own unique God-given purpose and calling, and so that you might be used by God to work for the common good of those who you get to influence on a day-to-day basis. And so today I'm super excited for our very first ever podcast on the show in the studio, aka our Common Good headquarters, my garage. We have the one and only Marky Sandico in the house. Marky, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you on the show. This is crazy. I mean, this is like we've been talking about doing one of these for a long time. And this is it. This is our first one. So, it's I've just been so encouraged. We've known each other for a little bit now, right? It's funny. We always talk about the people who are part of the church when we started as kind of like the OGs of the church. And so you're kind of one of those. You're one of the OGs of our church. You really were there since day one, 4, 5, 6 years ago when we started the church. And I've just been so, just on a personal note, I just want you to know I've been so encouraged and blessed and inspired to, one, just be in partnership and ministry together, but also just so encouraged to see how you've just grown over the years and how God has really been working in your life, and just to see the woman of God that you've become. And so I don't know what better way to start this podcast than to have a conversation with you. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
You feeling
I appreciate
good? Are you
that.
excited?
Yeah, I'm excited.
So Marky, you, I think most people know this, but you wear a lot of different hats, literally and figuratively. What are some of the things that you do? You're an associate producer at a video production company. You're an editor, a content editor at One Day's Wages, which is a local nonprofit grassroots organization that's working to end extreme global poverty. Shout out to Eugene Cho. You're also recently, we actually brought you on staff here at Common Good Church. And so you are a part-time communication specialist taking care of all things comms related internally and externally. So you wear a lot of different hats, but one of the hats that you wear that maybe unless people are on social media, they might not necessarily know about you is that you're a writer, you're a blogger, you're a creative, and you are a social media influencer. And one of the ways that you kind of focus that work is around this intersection of holistic wellness and socially conscious living. Now that right now for me is like a mouthful, and I just like, what does that even mean? That's so intriguing to me. What is that intersection look like? Can you maybe just begin our conversation by kind of unpacking that for us a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, the blogging itself kind of started out of my own pursuit of those things just in my personal life. When I say holistic wellness, I mean, it's an all-inclusive sense of wellness. I think the ways that wellness had been marketed to me in the past was like a product that you need to buy, or like a new serum or new skincare line or whatever it might be that's trending. But what I'd come to find is like a couple years ago, I got to a point in my life where I was just so burnt out physically, emotionally, spiritually, that like really holistically, I needed to start taking better care of myself.
Wow.
And so I just started on this journey, and part of my own pursuit of wellness was documenting that creatively. Writing has always been something I've enjoyed naturally, usually like via journaling when I was a lot younger, and blogging was kind of a very natural next step, just for like my own recording of what my thoughts were and the things that I was trying to get better mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and to be really authentic and honest about that journey too. I think the socially conscious living part came in just because it's something that I've always been aware of and wanting to integrate into my life. Socially conscious just meaning like being aware of the impact my lifestyle choices have on the environment and people and society around me.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
That's
just
good.
kind of combining those two things and honestly documenting that journey, mostly like for my close friends who were my followers on
That's awesome.
Instagram,
Yeah.
as well as like the 2 people who followed my blog when I first started it. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Now, if someone were to, I know you have your blog, but you also are on social media, in particular on the gram, IG. Now, if someone were to follow you on IG, or if they were to go and check you out, a lot of the content that you post is around this idea or this topic of, or this concept of slow fashion. Can you like explain that? Because I'm familiar with terms like ethical fashion. What exactly is slow fashion? And maybe you can even share, like, how did you in particular get interested in this space? Like, were you always into fashion? And then how did that evolve into kind of this whole notion of slow fashion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's good to clarify too. I have always been interested in fashion. Actually, when I was a senior in high school and getting career counseling, I wanted to go to school for fashion design.
So did I.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
it didn't end up
Okay.
happening for me. My parents, practical as they are, and also the ones funding my secondary education or post-secondary education, wanted me to go to like a more normal 4-year, not quite like a technical school, straight out of high school. So yeah, didn't end up majoring in anything fashion related, but still was kind of interested in it in the back of my mind. However, didn't really like prioritize that aspect of my creativity or life.
Gotcha.
But then when I started blogging, I was just sharing naturally about things that I was thinking about, processing and going through. And one of those things happened to coincide with like my husband and I had just moved in together and gotten our own place. And when you move, you just have all of your stuff that's coming with you.
Right.
And I realized, oh my gosh, I have so much stuff. And I think at that time, like the whole Marie Kondo thing was pretty popular. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to condo my closet and see what happens. And I realized that I really was holding on to a lot of clothing that maybe at one point I thought was stylish or trendy or cool, but maybe like was not flattering to my body type, or I didn't feel comfortable or empowered in, or was just like such poor quality because it was made to last only a couple wears, that it was no longer something I could wear for the long run. And so out of that place being like, wow, I have so much stuff. And even if I'm to always be like cycling through this and cleaning out my closet so what I have is minimal, that means that I'm outputting a ton of clothing waste. And as I was doing my research, realizing like, oh my gosh, like if I'm feeling like I'm outputting a ton of clothing waste, then I'm probably not the only one.
Right.
And textile waste actually being one of the bigger factors of waste that's generated in the world today.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that was like a slightly disturbing thing that I realized in my own closet cleaning process. And that got me interested in making an investment in more like staple, long-term, timeless pieces. So started just doing my research and finding various brands that claim the titles of slow fashion, ethical fashion, sustainable fashion. And yeah, over the past year have just kind of been on a personal journey exploring that and learning about different brands and fabrics. So when I say slow fashion, I mean fashion that is not made in such massive quantities that it cannot be purchased
Gotcha.
right away, or like it doesn't take 2 weeks for it to go
Right.
from the designer to someone's hands, and it's going to last more than just a handful of wears. So yeah, slow fashion being literally slow. The process for a garment to get to you is slower, but also the amount of time that it takes for that garment to wear out is a much slower process too.
Gotcha.
So holistically, that's what I'm trying to do is engage in slow fashion. What that looks like practically means not just buying long-term pieces from some of the brands that I've loved growing up, but researching brands that are creating those pieces ethically and sustainably. So ethically meaning that everyone impacted by the production process and the manufacturing and sourcing process is positively impacted by that.
Gotcha.
So not just like living wages, but the benefits to like live a sustainable life, making sure that the fabrics are of high quality so that they'll last a long time, and hopefully even natural fibers, so to not put plastic into the environment as we're washing our clothes.
Yeah.
Natural fibers also tend to last a lot longer, so that would be kind of like the sustainable aspect of fashion. Also, like a lot of companies are doing cool things to recycle materials and even recycle some of the plastic in landfills to make clothing out of it versus creating something new, therefore contributing to the waste factor eventually in the long run.
Gotcha. Wow. So you really thought through this, just in terms of, and when you talk even about like this idea of holistic wellness and socially conscious living, like you really think about this process and engaging in this from a very holistic standpoint. Like I'm curious to know, like, I know faith is a big part of your life, and I mean, I'm not a huge fan of labels, but you maybe would call yourself a Christian, a Jesus person, a Jesus follower, whatever you want to kind of name it. I'm curious, it's a Common Good podcast. How does, related to just what you just shared, I guess it's a two-part question. How does your faith inform kind of how you think about and understand this idea of common good? Because when I think about all the things that you're talking about, like in some ways that's kind of defining the common good. You're thinking about the common good, right? Everyone from the production to even earth care and like the waste output and all of these different facets and elements. So I'm curious to know, and for our listeners, like how does faith inform that type of understanding of common good? And then in particular, like how does then that impact or inform specifically like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis in terms of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So faith in general, I think as I've been like in my own faith journey and understanding of God and scripture and who Jesus is and how Jesus lived, I would agree with the sentiment that Jesus is for the common good. I think the people and places that Jesus was present in and engaged with reflect that, as well as like the whole counsel of scripture reflects that. When we go back to creation, thinking about how people were created in God's own image, I think I see a lot of that in the ways that I engage on social media, awesome. And in day-to-day life, honestly, if I believe that everyone is made in the image of God, then that should be dignified and honored through my actions and the ways that I speak or treat someone else.
That's so good.
So that definitely informs kind of my understanding of life and the pursuit of justice in various areas, but definitely in fashion and consumerism and just the content of my blog.
That's awesome. You mentioned consumerism. Let's talk about fashion for a little bit. In a lot of ways, I think, and I could be wrong, but at least from my perspective and my understanding, it seems like a lot of the fashion in the industry as a whole seems to be predicated on things like consumerism or capitalism. And I know personally, as someone that loves fashion and has always been, I wrestle a lot with it, especially now in my role as a pastor, where sometimes I question the ways in which I can really engage in it without feeling hypocritical at times. And so I'm just curious to know, as you're in this space and like, do you wrestle with kind of some of those complexities and those issues? And I don't know, how do you reconcile that for yourself? What are some of the questions that you're asking for yourself? Or maybe even for someone who's a listener who enjoys fashion and maybe is not quite as far along as you are in the journey. what are some of the things that maybe you've thought about, and what are some of the things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and something that I have been thinking about quite a bit lately. I think I oftentimes ask myself the question of, is an ethical influencer even something that can exist? Like, what does that even mean?
Wow. Like, is that contradictory in and of
Yeah,
itself?
exactly.
Yeah.
I think influencers in general, we're creating user-generated content, which is more trusted, more believable, whatever the statistics say. But at the same time, there comes a lot of power and privilege with that. And what you do with that influence can really impact the decisions other people are making around their consumption habits. And yeah, being somebody who questions my own consumption, it's not just that I'm questioning what I'm consuming, but also how much I'm consuming and why I'm consuming it. So I think the big question that I ask myself when I'm thinking about even the brands that I choose to partner with and how many I'm going to be sharing about, it's oftentimes like, do I actually need this item? Would I want to be seeing an advertisement or someone's thoughts about this thing? Or is it just kind of white noise, adding to the echo chamber of advertisements that are within social media right now? Also encouraging people to be thoughtful about their own consumption. So I will not just like partner with brands to share about new items, but like really encouraging people to shop secondhand or to wear what's already in their closets. Because oftentimes we look over things that we already own in thinking like, oh, I need to buy this new thing though. Like that's going to complete my wardrobe. That's going to make me happy. That's going to make me feel like X, Y, or Z. So yeah, basically just trying to get myself and therefore others to reconsider why they purchase what they do and how much and when, and to really encourage thoughtfulness before purchasing things.
Gotcha.
So I'm not going to be like, here's my code, please buy this thing. I need the commission. Because ultimately, like, I don't, and I'm not trying to encourage people to purchase things that they don't need.
Right.
But it is tricky because I think oftentimes influencers do that. And so even though that might not be my intention, I have to be pretty clear about that being the case.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, I mean, on this whole topic of influencer, there's a couple of things that come to mind, but the first thought that comes to mind is, obviously this is an area that you're very passionate about. It's something that you've been on a journey on over time. And how do you, like, as someone that wants to encourage other people to engage or to be as thoughtful as you are, do you find it challenging at times to, or do you ever wrestle with, I don't know, not wanting to be critical of other people or not wanting to be judgmental for those that maybe are still buying brands that you were buying 5 years ago, right? Or who aren't actually considering the amount of waste, or they're not considering the process of even the designs and the clothes that they're purchasing. Like, how do you, as someone who's passionate about these things, kind of, I don't know, balance that out in terms of like how you think about other people, making sure that people that are around you, even though they might not necessarily have the same set of convictions, don't necessarily feel like insecure or judged by like what they're wearing. Does that make sense? Like, I'm just curious to know
absolutely.
Like how you kind of balance that, or how you think through that.
It is such a tricky thing, but I think for me personally, like humility is really key, even as I'm personally navigating these spaces. Like, I just started my journey in blogging a little over a year ago. And so I understand, like, I'm really new to these topics, and there's probably decisions I'm making now that I'm going to look back on in a couple of years and be like, oh, like, was that really the most quote unquote ethical or sustainable decision? Maybe it wasn't. And so I'm trying to have grace on myself in my own learning process. So I think I absolutely need to give others that too. And even thinking about how, like, if a couple years ago I was purchasing fast fashion because that was all I could afford, then I know that there's also a socioeconomic barrier oftentimes for people to shop ethically, which is part of the reason that I encourage people to shop secondhand as well. That's actually how I got most of my ethical clothing when I was first starting my journey, because I acknowledged, like, okay, these brands are really expensive, and are they really as good as the money says that they are?
Right.
So yeah, not just encouraging people to shop quote unquote ethically, but also just secondhand, and maybe just think about what they buy before they buy it. But I think also there's a quote that comes to mind that I read somewhere, probably on Instagram, that's essentially the world doesn't need a few people doing sustainability perfectly. They need everyone to try doing it imperfectly.
Wow.
And that's not
That's
the exact,
good.
those aren't the exact words, but that's the concept that's really stuck with me. And
That's so good.
I think it's not just about like the collective decisions of people in my life and our society. It's not just about those decisions that are made personally, but also like, are we holding corporations and governments accountable to sustainable and ethical practices because they have power to implement that as well?
Yeah.
So I don't just blame it on the consumer for shopping at a place that I might choose not to shop at now. And so, yeah, of course, like my friends, family, I'm not going to be too harsh on them, but I am, of course, going to offer alternative options. So I think that's why even my choice to partner with the brands that I do, it's not that I'm trying to tell people like, no, you should completely stop this consumption habit, though I would want them to if I had the choice, but offering an alternative option or a solution versus just telling them what I think they're doing wrong.
Right. That's so good. That's really good. When you were talking about the quote, I thought you were going to quote Macklemore for a second for a topic.
That would be interesting. That would surprise me.
No, that's so good. Well, and I love just the whole idea of like it's not about doing it perfectly and recognizing we're all on this journey, right? And I think the humility and the grace. And even when we think about like as a church, I know we talk often about like we're all working for the common good, but we're all going to understand that a little bit differently. We're all going to engage in that work a little bit differently. But I think that's the beauty of it, right? In all of our diversity and all of the unique ways in which God has wired us, whether you're passionate about, someone's passionate about fashion, someone's passionate about different areas, that collectively, right? While maybe individually it might not feel like we're making that huge of a difference. I think there is this power of like we and the collective, right?
Definitely.
And I think in our individualistic society, we often don't recognize that. And I think that's such the value of like recognizing we all have something to contribute. And even if it's little in the beginning, like that's a start, right? Marky, talk to us a little bit about one of the things I really do appreciate about you is just your openness and your honesty and transparency. And I know you've been on a journey, even just spiritually. And this past year and a half, 2 years, you were going through a process where because of certain situations and circumstances in life and in ministry, kind of put you on a path where you were really wrestling with your faith. And for one, I just applaud you and like just being open about that. Because I think oftentimes in the church, we're just not transparent about that stuff. And we come to church and we pretend we have it all together, right? And so, but you've been really just open about that journey. And asking really tough questions, not even really being sure of where you were going to land in terms of your beliefs. And, but one of the things that's so impressive about, I guess, your journey is while you've certainly made strides in terms of kind of reconstructing your faith, you're still in process. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to like wrestling, because I think a lot of people wrestle with questions, and I think what sometimes that can result in is we find ourselves not really able to kind of do anything, if that makes sense, right? Because I'm trying to like figure my stuff out in terms of what I believe and what I understand about God before I actually like engage, right? But I find what's encouraging about your story is while you've been in this wrestling space, this is actually what birthed like the work that you're doing. So it's like, I don't have all my questions figured out yet. I don't even know what I believe about God yet per se, but yet I'm doing this thing and I'm making a difference and I'm working for the common good. I don't know, maybe share a little bit more of like how you kind of see that happening and like, what's your advice for people that are wrestling with their faith right now and they're not really sure what they believe? How can they like actually engage in doing good work and being a part of the solution, even while they're in kind of this process?
Yeah. I mean, to answer the first part of your question about when you're in a process of deconstruction in faith and when maybe you don't have the things that you would like to have figured out and solidified, I think it is easy to get frozen in that place. I mean, be it because of fear of rejection by maybe like your fellow peers and church friends, or like anxiety about not having the answers to these really big questions.
Right.
So I think for myself, when I was in that place, I had just left a ministry job that was like a great job, but I think a lot of hard things happened. And by the time I left, I was really burnt out and even jaded about the evangelical church in general. I think there were a lot of things I saw in scripture and in who Jesus is that were not reflected in the ways that the church has used scripture historically or even today on a political level. So all that being said, I had a lot to be skeptical about and angry about. And I just took a year to kind of decompress and process all of that. I stepped down from any ministry leadership positions, not to isolate myself, but to take off any responsibility of like needing to be a certain person to a certain group of people as I was deconstructing and hopefully eventually reconstructing my faith. And that was really freeing. I think in that time, it was when I felt that God most authentically met me because I was being my most honest self and saying like, God, these are the questions that I have. Is this okay? And I really felt that God was telling me like, I'm not afraid of your questions. I'm like so much bigger than your questions. And I'm even bigger than the answers that the church claims to have or that you hope to find.
Right.
And so I think that freedom really gave me the courage to be creative and to find things that would allow me to flourish in that year of life. So yeah, out of that came my blog because I found it as a space that I could really connect with myself and therefore also connect with God in the most basic of ways that I could think because I had stripped everything else down.
Wow.
So I think, yeah, if there were like, I guess a word of advice, I don't know if I could distill it into some like direction, but I think being honest with yourself and with God or like close friends and loved ones about the questions you have is really key because I do believe that God puts those questions on our hearts for a reason, if not to be a prophetic voice to the church at some point. So yeah, I think that was a big thing for me, was not being afraid of my questions and just allowing myself to sit with them, even as I haven't developed answers for everything yet. And then the second part of your question regarding, the brokenness in the world and just how massive that is. A conversation that I had last week with my spiritual director was really enlightening to that question, actually. She had shared that God doesn't necessarily need us to fix all the brokenness in the world, but he invites us to be a part of that restoration and reconciliation, meaning that when God invites us to be a part of it, it's also, and first and foremost, like for our own benefit and flourishing. So if I'm trying to engage in justice in a way that is burning me out, maybe there's a different way I can be engaging that's more honoring to how God created me to function, and is going to be both life-giving for me, definitely tiring as things like that are, but still life-giving at the core, but also beneficial to whatever people group or topic I'm engaging with. So yeah, all that to say, I think kind of reassessing where we are and humbling ourselves to understanding what our role is in broader impact before taking a step is important, and just allowing God to lead you in what brings you life and what you're passionate about or what your heart breaks for or is naturally angry for can be a good next step.
That's awesome. So good. So good. Wow. Mark, I feel like we can just keep talking forever and ever. So many other questions I would love to ask, but I know we're out of time. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for hanging out, for having this conversation, for sharing your journey and your story. And I'm believing, I'm hoping that people are going to be encouraged by it. So, hey, thanks so much for joining in today. Thanks for listening. I do hope that you're inspired. I hope that you're encouraged. I hope that there was something that was shared that maybe sparked something in you to begin to, if you haven't yet, to do the work of journeying with God and discovering what are the unique things that God has put into you? What are the interest levels? What are the different things, passions? And how can you engage those things in light of looking at the brokenness in the world? And to recognize that you are a part of the solution, that God actually is calling you and is inviting you and us collectively to actually be a part of working for the common good. And so hope you enjoyed this conversation. We're going to have a lot more of these just like it with different people in our church and people who are connected to our church. So the best thing that you could do, again, this was our first one, but if you liked it, like it. Like, is that a thing? I know Instagram's taking away likes, but like this, subscribe to it, share it, comment on the YouTube channel, tell your friends about it. And we're going to try to do these on a monthly basis. So we're going to be back real soon with another episode. Thank you again for taking the time, for listening, for tuning in with us. We love you. God bless you. Have an awesome month. We'll see you again real soon.